highlighting the need to think about other ways of, shall we say, developing their future. I think it's a very encouraging piece. It's nice to think that the police are taking advantage of people being at home in a way to try and really hone in on the criminals, the serial criminals. And I think, if I may, just on police, there's also a very good picture on the front page of the Telegraph of the police who were in Hyde Park yesterday, potentially arresting a rather small group of people who are protesting against lockdown. And it's just a reminder, if I may say, of the great work that the police do without too much PPE themselves. All they're wearing is some blue gloves to protect themselves while they go about doing the incredible job that they've been doing. So I think the police have been really supportive and effective, even though during this period it's been quite confusing for them in many ways in terms of what they can and can't enforce.
Let's talk about the work of ministers, if we could, because we've got this new hub and spoke system, a reorganisation of government, we're told, and policy now in far fewer hands at the centre of government. But many of us have noticed that none of those hands are female hands. Do you think that matters?
Yes, I've always thought it matters. The point is, if you want to have a government that really represents all the talents and thinks about everybody, you've got to make sure that the people at the top are like that as well. And we hear a lot from Number 10, and particularly from Dominic Cummings in the past, about wanting to make sure that we have a diverse talent at the top of government. Well, I would start by making sure there are some women at the top. Not only is the top 4 all male, the head of the civil service, of course, and the senior posts are generally held by men. And I really think that the Prime Minister needs to do something about that. And it's not, if I may say, because I often get a fair amount of criticism for this, it's not about the so-called optics, it's about good government. Good government, like good governance for a business, we've always encouraged businesses to have women at the top as well, involves having women to help with decision making. I think this government would be making better decisions if it incorporated some women at the top.
And very quickly, you know Boris Johnson well. It seems he's had something of a Damascene conversion about the nanny state as a result of having COVID-19 himself and being told that he is overweight. Is that the kind of thing that we can try? We read about it in the papers. Would you believe that?
Yes, I would believe that. I mean, I think it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, we all get affected by our own illnesses, and there's nothing like a brush with death to make one really rethink your own health and the consequences perhaps to other people. I've sat in cabinets with Conservatives before where health secretaries have tried again and again to introduce some sort of obesity limit in terms of product or in terms of exercise, and it's always pushed back a bit from fellow Conservative Secretaries of State. But I hope that that's over, and that with his own experience he'll be able to spearhead a real change.
Amber Rudd, you Pim, thanks both very much indeed. As the Prime Minister himself says, apparently, don't be a fatty in your 50s. And with that thought, so to the weather. Pretty warm. I think a fair and meteorologically accurate estimate would be a bit of this and a bit of that. Over to Chris Fawkes in the weather studio. Chris.
Indeed, Andrew, yes, I'll fill out the details with the this and that of the forecast. And actually, it's going to get much hotter as we head towards the middle part of the week. The hottest weather we've seen so far this year, with the peak of the heat coming on Wednesday, with temperatures forecast to reach 27 Celsius into the early 80s in Fahrenheit. Today, though, it's not that hot. For England and Wales, we've got some sunshine. We feel quite warm in the sunshine here. Northern Ireland, the rain easing off for a time before coming back later this afternoon. And for Scotland, brightening up today across the north and east as we go through the afternoon. 16 degrees in Aberdeen, up to 20 in Norwich and in London as well. Now, overnight tonight, rain returns to Northern Ireland, becomes quite heavy here and then moves into Scotland, across northern England, and perhaps some splashes of rain getting in across Wales and the Midlands for a time too. The south stays dry, and it's going to be a much milder night compared with recent nights. Temperatures between around 8 and 11 degrees. Tomorrow's weather. Well, we've got cloud again across the northern areas of the UK with rain at times. Could see some of that rain getting into northern England, Wales and the Midlands, but the south of Wales, the south of England and East Anglia stay dry. It starts to warm up, 24 degrees Celsius the top temperature towards the southeast, warming up as well in eastern Scotland with highs of 18 in Aberdeen. But it's on Wednesday that we're likely to see the driest, sunniest weather nationwide, really. That's the latest forecast. Andrew.
Look forward to Wednesday. Thanks very much. Now then, nothing is certain, but every scrap of data we're reading at the moment suggests that we're living through the mother of all recessions, possibly the deepest for 300 years. And with millions of us relying on state support, borrowing this year is set to dwarf even what we saw during the financial crisis. What does this all mean for our future economy and our future prospects? Let me ask the man in charge of marking the government's economic figures. Robert Choate is chairman of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, and he joins me now. Welcome, Mr. Choate. Can I ask you, first of all, very simple question. People see these predictions, worst for 300 years, etc., etc., etc. How worried should people be themselves?
Well, the key worry is if you have not just a very sharp downturn in the economy, but one that scars its future potential. So people shouldn't panic in the sense that we know that the economy, probably at its worst last month, may have been a third or so smaller than it normally would have been in terms of the output of goods and services and people's spending. But that should be the worst of it, and we now go into a period of recovery as the restrictions are loosened. So the key issues in terms of how bad this feels, the impact for the public finances, are how swift that recovery is and whether the economy is permanently scarred at the end of it, i.e. we come out of this with the economy being smaller than we would have anticipated going in. That's a bigger question than exactly how deep it is at the worst point.
Yes. There's a whole alphabet of possible shapes of recovery, a U-shaped recovery, an L-shaped recovery, which is no recovery at all. But you have said at the OBR you're hoping for a V-shaped recovery, quite a quick bounce back, and we're back to by the end of next year. Is that possibly a little bit optimistic?
Well, that was basically an illustrative scenario to show the channels through which the hit to the economy would affect the public finances, which is roughly speaking that if you disrupt the economy, you lose tax revenues, and the government's policy response is pushing up spending, and both of those things push up borrowing. In practice, I think you're likely not to see the economy bouncing back to where we would have expected it otherwise to be by the end of the year, which is part of that assumption, but instead a rather slower recovery. And that will depend first on the pace at which public health restrictions are loosened, but also, of course, on the way in which people's behaviour responds. So if you allow people back into the workplace, back into shops, back into restaurants, will they actually go? Will they feel too nervous? So you would expect, I think, a slower recovery than the V shape that you simply make for that assumption.
So this is all based, as you say, on people's behaviour and guessing it ahead of time. It is perfectly possible that after this, people will not go out and spend in the way that economists hope they will.
Well, we have to wait and see. As you say, it's a matter of psychology as much as the concrete restrictions as well. We're also going to go through a period, I think, in which businesses are going to come out of this feeling the need to restructure the way in which they work, and not simply to deal with a new temporary normal, hopefully, of greater social restriction, but also adjusting for the longer term. You would expect, for example, I think coming out of this, that more sales are going to be done online than you would previously have expected going into this. And will we have the same size restaurant or retail sector that we went in? So there's businesses and individuals as well that have to adjust to this.
You used what I thought was a very interesting word a moment ago. I think the Governor of the Bank of England has used the same word when he's talked about scarring of the economy. In other words, that we come out of this not just with a smaller economy, but also a differently shaped economy. What's your research showing on how different the economy might be after COVID-19? Will there be sectors that have vanished completely and new sectors blooming in their place?
I think you can certainly see those sorts of adjustments, as I said. I mean, imagine, do you think that the restaurant sector is going to be the same size coming out of this as you went in? When we talk about scarring, we're basically talking about whether the short-term hit to the economy has permanent or at least very long-lasting consequences. And that can arise for three main reasons. We have a period in which some business investment will have been lost or cancelled. You also may have some businesses failing, part of that restructuring process you described, and also that some people who may have been furloughed and go then into unemployment find it harder to get back into the labour market. So all the government's policy measures, and the Bank of England as well, by trying to support people's and businesses' incomes and to help them finance themselves through this, are designed entirely to try to minimise that scarring, which is also important for the future of the public finances as well.
Future of the high street?
Well, it's, as I say, you can imagine that there's a whole lot of decisions that people are going to have to take coming out of this in terms of what the right business structure is. Have they got the right number of outlets? How can you operate them on that sort of basis? So not just the high street, but I think a whole variety of sectors are going to need to be thinking about what business looks like in either the new normal or at least a sort of quite extended period of normal before we get there.
At the beginning of the interview, I mentioned that a huge amount of government debt hanging on the shoulders of the state, £300 billion or more. Can I ask you, is it possible going forward to sustain that level of debt without cutting spending or raising taxes or doing something like that?
Well, there's a distinction here between the stock of debt and the amount you're borrowing in any given year. So we're certainly going to see temporarily a considerably higher amount of government borrowing. We'll get the first figures for April on that later this week. The fact that the level of debt goes up on its own doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the sort of austerity that followed the financial crisis. Much more important to that is whether you have this effect of scarring of the economy, and if the economy is permanently smaller, then you get permanently less tax revenue, for example. Do we come out of this with a much bigger debt interest bill? At the moment, it's relatively cheap for the government to borrow, so hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. And then there'll also be political choices coming out of this. Do we want to spend a higher proportion of national income than we went in, for example, on health and social care? So all of those things together will shape the fiscal challenge for the government coming out of this. But a post-financial crisis style extended period of austerity is not a done deal.
And the Prime Minister has already told Tory MPs he doesn't want to do it either. But can I ask, this is a government with big ambitious ideas about more public spending, particularly in the Midlands and the north of England. Is that going to be sustainable, given the level of debt we already have?
Well, as I say, I think it depends very much on what level of government borrowing, the ongoing amount, the ongoing gap between spending and receipts that you have. So the government's obviously going to have to put in place at some point a new set of spending plans. In the budget, it seems like a lifetime ago, back in March, it put down some much more ambitious plans for capital spending. So it'll need to look at that. It'll need to look at whether you want to do more day-to-day spending in some areas of public services. And then, of course, if the consequences of that for government borrowing, the government decides are unacceptable, then there's always the option of looking at tax increases as well.
Robert Choate, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Line of Duty, the police thriller, has been one of the BBC's most popular dramas. Work on the series was beginning when coronavirus struck and brought it to a sudden halt. I've been talking to one of its stars, Vicky McClure, and to its creator and writer, Jed Mercurio. They're both involved in Asks for Masks, which raises funds for health workers. Viewers can bid for items on an online auction, including some donated by celebrities. Here is a brief clip of life inside AC12 right now to explain.
Yeah, that's the ticket. Now, about this coded message we received. Steve.
Kappa,
Where are you, sir?
I'm at AC12, sir. Working on a case.
Out your waist. Do you think I come up the lagging in a bubble?
This is a virtual background, sir.
Right, well, all right then, but it better not be coming out of the AC12 budget.
Vicky, let's start with you. Whose idea was it to revive the characters for this promo?
That would be Jed. He got in touch with us to see if we was up for doing it, which we definitely was. It's for a great cause, and yeah, we were glad to get back into character, into costume, albeit Martin's wasn't quite there, but yeah, it was great fun.
Jed, I know you were a hospital doctor before you picked up the keyboard and became a writer. What was the genesis of Asks for Masks, and how does it work?
Well, that actually came from contact through my former life as a hospital doctor, and they got in touch because they wanted people to help publicise their campaign for a better supply of PPE for frontline healthcare workers, and we were delighted to help and support with the video and get the word out.
Vicky, I know that you were 4 weeks into filming Line of Duty when the virus struck and everything had to stop. That must have been a big blow.
Yeah, it was. It was kind of strange because we was on set and obviously a lot was unfolding. And I think we all knew that we was, not far off having to shut down. And we did when it was the right time to do it. It's a massive blow for everybody, no matter what business you're in. It's tough to not have to go to work when that's what we naturally do. So we'll get back up and running as and when it's safe, I imagine.
Jed, everyone in the television industry is asking themselves about how they're going to be able to carry on, or if they're going to be able to carry on. How confident are you that you're going to be able to return to filming Line of Duty this year?
I think it's still something that's in doubt. A lot of people are working very hard on coming up with codes of practice within the TV industry, But the reasons that we shut down were related to what was going on in wider society. We had a small outbreak earlier on in our shoot, and because at that time there was the public health infrastructure providing test, trace and isolate, we were able to contain it and carry on. The problem was when that was abandoned by the government, we then were looking at a situation where we couldn't apply that. So to be honest with you, there's a lot we can do within the industry, but until wider society has the public health infrastructure of test, trace and isolate in place, it's going to be very hard for anyone.
So testing and tracing would, in your view, allow television and film and other creative industries to restart again if it was done properly?
I think it'd be one very important element of it, and the reason for that is that we can't make productions in a bubble. The cast and crew will go home, they'll come into contact with other people, they'll be interacting with the rest of society. We have guest artists come on, crew interacting on and off set. I just don't think, unless wider society has got the process right, we'll be able to work in isolation.
So it sounds to me like Line of Duty won't be coming back this autumn at any rate. Can I ask whether when it does come back, whether you're going to have to rewrite your plot lines given this extraordinary event that's happened to all of us?
I think that's a great question, and we're all considering that. The fact is that we shot for 4 weeks in a pre-lockdown, pre-COVID world, and all that material would have to be reshot if we were going to change things. So it's something that has huge cost implications, but we are discussing it.
Are you raring to get back, Vicky?
I am, yeah, even if it means reshooting what we've already shot. Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm quite bored, as I think a lot of people are, but we just can't rush it. Nobody knows how this is going to unfold, and we've just got to make sure everybody's safe.